So the two books are, though they deal with the broad topic of caste, they're a little different from each other in their approach and in the way and in the subject matter, so to speak. We'll get a little bit more into that as we go along. So what we have thought of doing is we will actually divide the session into two segments. We will first talk about Manoj's book, and then we will come to Radhika's book. So starting with you, Manoj, so your two previous books, the first was on the 1984 violence against the Sikhs, and the second was about the violence against the Muslims. This is 2002, Gujarat. And this is your third book. The book started out as a project, again, of violence against the Dalit community. Is that right?
Yes.
But then it kind of morphed or evolved into something else, right? What was that process like? And would you, I mean, sort of leading question, would you say that the story of caste in India is a story of violence?
Well, very well put. But before I answer your question, I want to draw...
Is that mic working?
Yeah, is it working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So before I answer your question, I want to draw the attention of the audience to the tree you see there. You know, it commemorates something. It's mentioned there that this is where Gandhi held prayer meetings in the year 1927. Now, the reason I draw your attention to that is to highlight the fact that all over the country, you will see many such, milestones commemorating some event or the other relating to our freedom struggle. We are very comfortable talking about our freedom struggle. The reason being that the villain in the freedom struggle is who? The white man, the colonial ruler. But when it comes to the parallel social struggle, struggle for social reforms, including caste reforms, that took place over the centuries. In fact, that preceded the colonial rule, that dates back, in the words of historians, to the days of Buddha and Kabir, Nanak, Basava, right? And through the colonial period, and it has survived even the post-colonial period. Unlike the political struggle, which ended in the freedom for our country in 1947, this social struggle did not end. And yet, we hardly pay much attention to it. My book, it is so fat, not because I love writing fat books. My earlier books were nowhere as fat as this.
Right.
And my earlier books dealt with, as he said, violence, which was really a subject I handled as a journalist, dealing with the subject of impunity. Why is there so much impunity for communal violence, right? And likewise, I wanted to do a book on impunity surrounding caste violence. But then I found myself having to go beyond the question of impunity, because I was again and again running into this pattern of a structural bias. Some arm or the other of the Indian state, be it the police, the prosecuting agency, the trial court, or the appellate court, would be betraying what was clearly structural bias. And why do I call it structural bias? Because on the flimsiest of grounds, you would deny justice to victims of caste violence, despite all the evidence that is there, despite the gravity of the offense. So I wanted to understand where this was coming from. Why is there such a gap between the rhetoric and reality in our country, despite all the values of that we espouse in the Constitution? Now, that is what led me to go into the debates concerning abolition of untouchability in the Constituent Assembly.
Right.
And then there were references to struggles or debates that took place during the colonial period. So I went into those, and it was in that process that I discovered a treasure trove of unexplored legislative and judicial debates going back to 2 centuries. And why it was unexplored is the big question, because most of that material was hidden in plain sight in the very archives that academics go to. It's their domain. But some of these legal aspects of caste were neglected, and it was left to a journalist to go way beyond his comfort zone and deal with various aspects which people with academic training in history or sociology would have probably been better equipped to handle. But since they did not do so, by default, I ended up doing it, and by default, in chapter after chapter, I make quantum leaps in terms of new information. Just now you had a session on Jainism. I mean, I mentioned that only because it's on top of people's minds who are sitting here. And there was a lot of talk about purity in the context of Jainism too, right? Their dietary restrictions and so on and so forth. Now, how many of us know that there were, just as I told you about this tree commemorating something relating to the freedom struggle, and how there are no similar milestones relating to our, this equality struggle. Equality champions, we don't know much about. Freedom fighters, we know a lot about, right? So there was a case in this very state which became the context in which the term untouchability was defined by the Mysore High Court. The term untouchability is put in inverted commas in the constitution, and they left it undefined. It was a case pertaining to Jains, because there was a case in which one of the petitioners said that, look, I am suffering from untouchability. So they had to go into this question: Can the term Jainism apply to? Can the term untouchability apply to Jainism?
Right.
So these are the kind of questions they went into. Now we don't know much about these things. I can go on and on. When was the silence on untouchability broken in Indian Parliament, or whatever it was called during the colonial period? It was called Imperial Legislative Council. It was not by any Congress leader. It was not by any Hindu leader. It was by a Parsi legislator from central provinces called Manekji Dadaboy. He is so little known that historians, in a very lazy fashion, confuse him for the more famous Dadabai Nauroji. They are two very different people, lived in different eras. But that's the kind of confusion, shoddiness you come across in books that are otherwise considered definitive works on caste and untouchability and so on. Now, do we know, many of us are probably people who are products of intercaste marriage, or who have themselves engaged in intercaste marriage, or at least we know people who have engaged in intercaste marriage. Do we know that not too long ago it was completely illegal, and children of intercaste marriage were considered illegitimate? Right. Do we know that it took a 30-year battle beginning in 1918 by none other than the elder brother of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, that is Vittalbhai Patel. He initiated that battle, but there was such a pushback from the Hindu right. The Hindu right, when I say, it doesn't refer to the Hindu right that we are accustomed to in today's context, because RSS was yet to come into existence. It was born only in 1925. The Hindu right of 1918 was in the Congress party itself, which was a big tent. It represented all shades of opinion. So the Hindu right that pushed back against intercaste marriage bill included people like Madan Mohan Malviya, who you may recall that in 2014, soon after Modi came to power, he conferred Bharat Ratna, the highest civilian award, on him. This is to show that these leaders are important to us. We valorize them, but we don't know the dubious role that they played in the context of caste. And that dubious role is not limited only to, say, somebody like Malviya. Even Gandhi, for that matter, who otherwise engaged with caste, more than probably any other Congress leader, in 1918, when Vittalbhai Patel raises this issue, the opposition to that legislation, that proposal, that bill, was not confined to people like Malviya and Surendranath Banerjee in the House. Some leaders from outside also opposed it, and those included none other than Mahatma Gandhi himself. He said, why on earth do you have to raise an issue of social reform that is likely to polarize our society and distract attention from the more pressing political struggle. So these are the kind of issues that were raised. So to cut a long story short, only around the time of independence, because of sheer expediency, they couldn't now blame the lack of recognition for intercaste marriage anymore on the colonial administration. Now that option was not available to them, no more scapegoating of colonial rule. It will become very evident that intercaste marriage bill, much as it was important and that was going to benefit Hindus across the spectrum. It was not something that was only meant for lower caste, right? So, if that was something that was held up till the time of independence, it was because we were so lacking in remorse. There was no change of heart, and that showed in this impunity for violence against untouchability. So this was the reason why I turned a book that was originally supposed to be a study on impunity for caste violence into a legal history of caste. The reason being that the legal history would help us understand where this impunity was coming from, this structural bias.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because that's basically, the reason why this book is as long as it is it's the definitive history of legal reforms, the legal interventions into the whole caste reform system. Caste reform is basically a question of social reform, but social reform does not take place by itself in most cases. So you need legal provisions, and the legal provisions that were provided during colonial times and then post-independence. The Constitution is where the fundamental rights of every individual Indian citizen and equality of every Indian citizen is enshrined. To what extent is that carried out? We'll turn to Radhika. Radhika is a very different kind of book, in that if Manoj's book is a macro book, we are looking at the caste system, his caste system from a legal perspective, its history, how the legal reforms have been implemented in India or have not been. Radhika's is looking at a specific community in a specific city. Banaras, the Dome community are the traditional corpse burners on the ghats of Banaras. And they're designated to dispose of bodies in the Hindu system, part of the ritualistic framework. What drew you to this subject? Why did you choose to work on the domes? This was a very long research study, right? 7-8 years, and then you wrote the book. Why did you choose the subject? How did you get into their lives? Because originally, of course, you're coming in from the outside.
Yeah. So it began when I was pursuing my master's in journalism at Columbia University.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a thesis project. And I came across an article about the Dome community. And I was very interested to learn more about them. And when I went back and I researched, whatever literature was available, documentaries that were available, all focused on the community, but their work related to their work at the cremation ground. And there was just a very unidimensional representation. There wasn't more to do with them. And I wanted to look at the other aspects of their lives. More informed narratives about what they do, how do they spend time with their families. So for example, when a Dome corpse burner, once he closes, at the end of the day, when he goes back home, how does he spend time with his family? How does cremating these corpses affect him mentally? What about the children? Do they have access to good quality education? And surely they don't want to grow up to be corpse burners, right? And what about the women? Why are they absent from public spaces? Are they allowed to step out and work and earn a living? So these are the questions that were lingering in my mind, and that's how I began this process of reporting about the community. When it came to reporting, when I went to Manikarnika Ghat, which is this very important open-air cremation ground in this country, which is situated in Banaras, the corpse burners over there, the men were really not receptive and forthcoming to me. Obviously, because I'm, for one, an outsider, and nobody wants to talk to someone and say, give the whole history about their lives. And so I said, okay, fine. And also because I was a woman approaching them, they weren't used to that.
Right.
So I decided to pull back a little bit and just observe them quite patiently and see how they interacted with each other, how they worked together. When it came to interviewing the women from the community, I think as a female reporter, it was easier. I wouldn't say completely easy, but it was relatively easier because I could get access in terms of sitting with them in private spaces and talking to them about the most intimate things about their lives, not necessarily in the presence of their husbands,
Right.
which a male reporter probably would have to, he would have to sit with the husband and the wife. And initially our conversations were very, very formal. They were very to the point. They were very superficial. But as over a period of time, it became this familiar presence. Our conversations became more lengthier, more organic, more easygoing. And it was in these moments that something very interesting would happen when suddenly somewhere an anecdote would emerge or an insight into the person's life or the community at large. So I think that was the whole process of getting to know them and just getting those lives.
Yeah, I mean, very little is generally known about the Dome community, the history of the Dome community, their daily lives. What does it look like? What do they go through? If you could read a short passage from the book, where that actually gives us the book gives us very keen insights, and it's very strong narrative nonfiction. So I wanted Radhika to read a little bit, which will at once give you a quick insight into what the life of a dome who's working on the burning on the ghats and at the burning pyres actually feels like.
Okay, so this is a passage about Akash, who is a corpse burner at Manikarnika Ghat. This is his introduction. For a 30-year-old man, Akash has a scrawny frame and looks at least a decade younger. He wears an oversized vest, which begins inches below his neck, and pants which he rolls up while at work. From a string around his neck dangles a reedy iron pendant that he uses as a toothpick to tease out the bits of betel leaves wedged between his teeth. A thin scarlet-hued gamcha is usually fastened around his waist or wrapped around his head. The tail end of his gamcha is often used by him to wipe the sweat off his face. The whites of his eyes are discolored, a pale hue of mustard. In his lifetime, Akash has seen all sorts of bodies, deformed, mutilated, broken. Corpses with smashed skulls, severed limbs, gunshot wounds, and knife-torn torsos. He has cremated those who have died by suicide, either by hanging or self-immolation. Over the years, Akash has admitted to wanting to vomit while working at the ghat. He tells me in Hindi, "It's the sight of melting flesh that is revolting. That is why most dome men drink alcohol or chew gutka. We kill our senses before getting down to work." At Manikarnika Ghat, the working conditions are debilitating. Not only are Akash and his co-workers subjected to extreme dehydration, but also, if the winds are strong and fierce, their skin and hair are often singed by the wayward flames. We don't have a choice, we have to drink, says Akash. We work with dead bodies. We have to smell such terrible things that we feel sick to our stomachs. Alcohol makes things bearable. At least our breath smells of liquor and not of a decaying corpse. Thank you.
Fantastic. Terrible, but also fantastic. Now, there's a real dichotomy there, right? I mean, the domes are designated, they're a particular subcaste who are designated to dispose of the corpses in the Hindu ritualistic system. So in a way, I mean, the way I'm looking at it, they are the bearers of the sacred flame. They are the only people who have access to it. The sacred flame that lights the pyre. So in a way, you could say they would be accorded the status of a high priest in Hinduism, but it's exactly the reverse. They are Dalits, they are so-called untouchables. There is no escaping from a person in the Dome community is born into who they are. The profession is dictated to them. And is there an escape at all?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So let me start with an anecdote or an example. Bhola, he is one of the protagonists in my book, and he is the only one in his Dome Basti to be able to leave Chand Ghat, leave Banaras, and pursue higher education. So Chand Ghat, just for clarification, is a fictitious name. Of course, the Basti is very real, the people are very real, but I've changed their names to protect their identity. So coming back to Bhola, he managed to go to Ludhiana and pursue a higher degree. But over there, he hides his caste. He hides his identity. He hides his background. And that is only because his own experiences, and this is something that he told me, when he tells people who he is, his background, that he is the son of a corpse burner, people distance themselves from him.
Right.
Or they try to humiliate him or ridicule him. And so he has learned to protect himself by hiding his identity. And he'll always present himself in this, he combs his hair in a certain way. He makes sure he always looks sharp. His shirt, his pants, everything is ironed. His shoes are polished. And he's learned English. And so in college, sometimes he mispronounces certain words, and his friends make fun of him, And so then he doesn't let that deter him in any way. He tells them, okay, tell me how to pronounce this word correctly. And they, of course, tell him. And then he keeps repeating it in his head over and over and over again until he gets it right. So the point I'm trying to make is that he is the kind of person who doesn't let anything come in his way. Right. And even when Bhola was young, when he was 5 or 6 years old, he knew education was his ticket to get out of Chand Ghat and Banaras and look for alternative professions because he didn't want to become a cremator. And he used to tell his uncles and neighbors that I want to grow up and do something else. I want to leave Chand Ghat. And they would laugh at him and say, you are the son of a corpse burner. And the son of a corpse burner can grow up to be nothing more but a cremator. And he said, let me show you how I changed this narrative. And he is, of course, now in a different city. He has a good pay package. He's working in a company. So yeah, but the point that I'm trying to make is that he is an exceptional person. He's highly ambitious. He's very driven. But not everyone is like him, and and in the book you'll get to know also that there are people who try to find alternative professions, but it's very difficult for them. The struggle is very much there.
Yeah, I think even as a larger narrative, and that's something that Manoj's book explores as well, caste mobility is, I mean, it's a right that's guaranteed to Indian citizens on paper now, courtesy the Constitution, but on the ground, it's more the exception than the rule. So, yeah. We don't have very much time because we wanted to go to the awards, but I wanted to ask you, Radhika, about, so your book is set in Benares, and Benares is sort of has been in the news, the center of development. It's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Lok Sabha constituency. There's been a lot of development. Most in the news has been the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. How has the city changed? How is it changing? And specifically, is the development benefiting the Dome community?
Yeah, so I think whoever's watching the news would know that Varanasi is at the forefront of the news most of the time. And now because of the general elections and since it's the Prime Minister's constituency, it will be again in the news. A lot of development is happening. A lot of investment is being made in the city. New roads are being built, new bridges are being constructed. There is, of course, the International Cricket Stadium that is also there, which is being built. And then, of course, the Kashi Vishwanath corridor. I was there when it was being in the process of, when it was being constructed, and a lot of ancestral homes were being broken down, a lot of shops were being broken down. The charming gullies, certain gullies were also, broken. And so, there is a lot of development taking place. But when I spoke to certain members of the community, when I spoke to Twinkle, who is the wife of a corpsman, I said, what are your thoughts of what's happening? And right around that time, of course, Jagdish Chaudhary, who was the Dome Raja, he passed away. He was awarded the Padma Shri after his death, and his son Hariom Chaudhary had gone to receive the award on his behalf. And he had said, finally the domes are getting some kind of recognition on a national platform.
Right.
But Twinkle said, I asked her, what do you feel about this? And she said, wo sab to theek hai, magar hamare liye kuch vikas nahi aaya. Like on the ground, for this dome basti, no changes have come across. There is water shortage, and these families live in one-room homes, most of them, and they are 6 to 7 family members. They don't have access to proper toilets. There's one toilet per house, and then I asked Bola also about how to go about, how can a change come about, and he said there are schemes available, of course, from the government, but a lot of people are not aware of these schemes. They are, or people are aware, but they don't have the sufficient documents to carry, to fill out the applications. So at the ground level, from their perspective, change has not come.
Right.
But they are very hopeful that in 2024, when the new government forms, things will change over there.
Yeah, I think that's a classic story of, there's a big gap. There has been traditionally a big gap between what is guaranteed to Indian citizens and of all castes. I mean, across caste, across classes, we won't get into class, but across economic barriers, what is guaranteed as rights and the execution of that, what people actually get on the ground. Sorry, we are out of time. We will not be able to take questions, but thank you all for being here. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Radhika. And wish you all the best for both your books.
Thank you so much, Udayan.